In 1997, Goldeneye 007 was a landmark first-person shooter that, although didn't create the genre, popularized it with people nobody at the time would have ever expected: console gamers. In a lot of ways, it's perhaps the main establishing point of the console FPS. So why wasn't it the first in a long series of phenomenal games? Why aren't there more of these? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx we ask the question: what killed the James Bond game franchise? If you had told me sometime between the year of 1997 and 1999 that Goldeneye 007 wouldn't be one of the biggest game franchises 10, 20 years later, I would have said to you, what? What are you talking about? This is the big game. This is the reason I have a Nintendo 64. Nothing against Mario 64, it's a great game, but this is what got me in the door. There was such a wide range of ages that absolutely loved James Bond and really wanted a game. And at the same time, many people who wanted to play a first-person shooter on the damn TV without dealing with intimidating linking of technology that most lay people in the 1990s didn't know how to do. They may have been technically illiterate, they may have been 5-year-old children, who knows? But the amount of influence on the video gaming world, not just the console gaming world, that Goldeneye 007, one of the few licensed games to be not just high quality, but literally one of the most high-regarded games of its time. The amount of influence that this game has, even today, makes it seem really strange that it's pretty much the only of its series. Not the only, and it's not as if there haven't been attempts since, but GoldenEye 007, developed by Rare for the Nintendo 64 console, seemed to just go off without a hitch. Yeah, it had a few problems. Yeah, that frame rate would tank sometimes. Yeah, it used a lot of tricks to get around hardware limitations. Not just in the graphics, but literally just in the storage of the game. The console's cartridges were very limited compared to a CD. But even though if you directly compare it to a game today, it's very rudimentary, and in a lot of ways, even kind of strange, it's really hard to understand why it didn't go on to more. The first thing I said about it was that it was perhaps one of the first licensed games to really be among the best games released. That doesn't mean that the license was handled well. Now, GoldenEye 007 was developed by Rare and published by Nintendo. You see, the next people to obtain the license were Electronic Arts, and they did exactly what you think Electronic Arts did with the James Bond license. They made a weird, incredibly badly received third-person shooter with no multiplayer mode based on Tomorrow Never Dies, and then realized they needed to try to make a game that was like GoldenEye in some way, and actually made one with the help of a developer by the name of Eurocom, making an actually critically acclaimed, though not quite as critically acclaimed as GoldenEye, at least a return to form with, an actual multiplayer mode, one of the reasons why GoldenEye did so well. But this was kind of an indicator as to exactly what the problem with the James Bond franchise in the video game world was going to be. A terrible game or two or three, usually so that the company doesn't lose the James Bond license. That's often a stipulation that they actually make games if they hold the license, and then somebody realizing that they had to make a good one, otherwise nobody would want to play them anymore. EA held that license for quite a while until 2008's Quantum of Solace, which was published by Activision. It was okay received. It wasn't really a earth-shaking game by any means, but after a few pretty stink bombs from EA, it was a palate cleanser and initiated some new interest in the series. They had also been working for quite a while to get the original GoldenEye on some recent console, but because Rare was bought by Microsoft and Nintendo had published GoldenEye 007, it was very hard for Microsoft and Nintendo to come to some kind of an agreement that allowed for the game to happen. So Activision was like, we see a need, let's make some money. So they did basically a quote-unquote reloaded version of Goldeneye. It's not a one-to-one remake of the original Goldeneye game, but rather an essential reimagining that features Daniel Craig as Bond and kind of the same levels, but not the same levels really. It's actually a pretty good game. I enjoyed it. There were some people who did see some issues in it, and to be truthful, it's really hard to argue against some of its kind of weirdness. I mean, if you're just explaining this game to a person who doesn't know what's going on, people are like, so it's a remake? No, it's not a remake. It's a new game? No, it's not a new game. Well, which is it? Still, it's fun, and it exists. Essentially, during the whole run, whether it was EA or Activision that held the license, it would be several really uninspired, phoning it in games, followed by something that they realized they actually had to put out something good. Which, if you do the math, makes for an underwhelming franchise. So when the franchise develops a reputation of being, well, not great, it doesn't really matter how good GoldenEye 007 on Nintendo 64 in 1997 is, it matters that the majority of James Bond games kinda suck. And it's been a few years since Activision lost the license. I mean, it happened in, depending on who you talk to, 2013 or 2014, and there really hasn't been a James Bond game since then. And the thing is, in the gaming climate we have right now, I would almost be a bit worried about a new Bond game after this long of there not being one. Through the years, there's been some rumbling that Telltale would like to make a series, but that's not what I'm referring to. I'm worried that such a big license would result in a big live service. So many of the first-person shooter franchises are just abandoning campaigns outright. Multiplayer is certainly an important thing if they ever made a new James Bond game, but so is the campaign. It's hard to overstate the influence of GoldenEye 007. Fans continue to recreate areas of GoldenEye 007, attempting to outright recreate the game itself as well. Multiplayer maps based on GoldenEye 007 were released as GoldenEye Source, and like I said, through the years there have been good Bond games. It's just, as a series, the whole thing just never was consistently good. And on top of that, never really actually consistent. It jumped back and forth between first person and third person, and although there are good examples of both, Everything or Nothing comes to mind as a great third person entry in the franchise, it never created an actual identity for itself. It was just kind of a grab bag of different things, like, what thing are we gonna make this time? Like, throw a dart at a dartboard with a bunch of cards on it. And that was ultimately one of the biggest problems. People just didn't know what to expect, and because there was so many bad games, it felt like a crapshoot. And that, I think, combined with the fact that both of the major publishers that have published a lot of James Bond games fell into this same pattern. It's essentially created a licensing nightmare where there's not a lot of trust from MGM, there's not a lot of drive, and there's not a lot of demand. The only way I'd really want a James Bond game, I think, is if it was made by Machine Games at this point. Although, MGM, if you happen to be listening, maybe call up Bethesda about that. What was your favorite James Bond game other than GoldenEye 007? Leave us a comment. If you like this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed, now would be a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time, right here on GameRanx.